Hello, everybody. I think I also should have a clicker in here, because I actually have more slides than this one. So I would need to actually click somewhere. Oh!
There we go.
OK, these friendly two buttons, next and back, so I hope I can use them. So I am Ahti Heinla. As introduced, I'm a co-founder and CTO of Starship, and I'm probably best known in the past as having been one of the founding engineers of Skype, but that was already like 15 years ago. So I'm now building the next success story that will probably be bigger than Skype, because the market of Starship is bigger than the market that Skype has. What I'm going to talk about, my title of my talk, is how to build a robotic startup. Yeah, but that's, in itself, it's kind of nebulous. I think, there isn't really like a, like a three-step guide. Do this, do that, and then third, and then you get like profit or big company or something like that. So my talk is with a little bit of a twist. It's how to build a robotic startup, but how to... this clicker doesn't work. That's really nice. Back. Next.
Turn it on and off.
Whoa! OK, so with a twist, building a robotics company in a small place. So what is a small place? Europe is actually a small place, and Estonia is an even smaller place. This is essentially compared to Silicon Valley and China. And this is a challenge. There's a lot more concentration of, let's say, venture capital, talent, business connections in, for example, Silicon Valley than there is in pretty much any city in Europe, or let alone Estonia. So this is, let's say, a fundamental disadvantage and a fundamental complication in building something like that in, for example, Estonia. And this slide, maybe it sounds like it's an advertisement to move to Silicon Valley, like let's just everybody move to Silicon Valley. That's actually not the focus of my talk at all, and for a very, very simple reason. Next slide. Is there like a voice command or something like that? So that's the reason. I love Europe and I love Estonia. I'm an Estonian patriot. I'm a European patriot. I have no interest to move to China or to move to Silicon Valley. And that's the same with like 95% of people who live in Estonia or Europe. People don't want to actually move so much. So even if the grass is greener somewhere else, then it doesn't really work that way for the majority. So let's think, what are these specific disadvantages of building a robotic startup in a small place, and what does this small place really mean? So the first thing we need to take into account is skilled people. Like the average IQ is the same pretty much all over the world. There are small differences, but those differences are fairly small. They're not large differences. That's not the reason why in Silicon Valley there is much more tech companies than in Tallinn, for example. But there's much more concentration of people with specific skills or backgrounds or specific types of companies in US, for example. So in software and startups, it's like a large part of everybody, a large part of the population who is skilled in doing these things has essentially, in America, has actually moved to Silicon Valley. So Americans move around a lot within one country, because it's kind of one culture, right? And if you want to build cars, you kind of move to Detroit, and fashion is New York, and there are other cities like that have specific industries in them, and in Europe obviously it doesn't work that way really, because people don't move across cultures so much. Like 5% of people do, but 95% do not. So even if let's say London is the financial capital of EU, and soon to be superseded by something else that actually is in EU. But still, like, it's not that all financial professionals are moving to London, because they don't want to move to a different country, right? And like within UK, it probably works that there is much more financially skilled people are moving to London because of that. But like from Manchester to London, for example. But across cultures, across countries, it doesn't work so much. So that's I think the primary reason why in Europe there is no such domain-specific concentration. That there is like, let's say Berlin is about startups, and all of the startup life in Europe happens in Berlin. Like, rationally speaking, that would be actually a good thing. Kind of emotionally speaking, it probably wouldn't be a good thing. Like, I wouldn't want to move to Berlin, probably. And what does that mean? It means that if you want to hire a particular specialist into your company, then you have much less selection. The population of Silicon Valley is like a couple of million or something like that. And I'm not sure how many of them are software engineers, but let's suppose 300,000 of them are software engineers. So even if you are in an area which has population of only a couple of million, so it's like the same population of Estonia, like roughly speaking. But if you want to hire a software engineer, you have much more selection in Silicon Valley. Because there's such concentration. And that really shows, it doesn't really matter when you hire a software engineer whether you have like 300 people to select from, but it really shows when you want to hire a specialist in one sort of narrow field, like a mechanical engineer experienced in drivetrains. If you want to hire such a person in Estonia, you probably have, I don't know how many people you have in your selection, maybe 3 or 5 or something like that. And in places where there have been more robotics companies and more concentration, you can have a selection of 50 or 200 people. So it's different, and that's a disadvantage. However, people can still learn. Like, you don't necessarily need to be experienced in drivetrains. Maybe you are slower to pick this new field up, like you don't have so much background knowledge, but you can still learn, and you can still develop a drivetrain. And you can still be successful, even though you have not worked all of your life in drivetrains. And similar stuff like around the time-of-flight cameras, for example. It's a good example. It's sort of an emerging field, and I'm not sure how many specialists in time-of-flight cameras there are in Silicon Valley. Maybe 20, I think. And in Estonia, it's like very round number. And that's why we have had to essentially learn all there is to learn about time-of-flight cameras, because we didn't have experience with these. We just had to learn from scratch, but we can still do it. Our robots still have time-of-flight cameras. They do work. We are actually one of the pioneers in this field. We are probably one of the robotics companies that started using time-of-flight cameras the first, regardless of this disadvantage of specialist skilled people in Estonia. So there's also this difference of research versus practical robotics. So I guess this slide kind of is self-explanatory. So, guess what's the top reason for failure in the robotics competition when you build a robot? Just read the slide. Which do you think it is? It's actually the really simple things. So there's some strange abnormality in robotics that most professionals in robotics are actually in robotics research. They're not actually building practical robots. And while there's an overlap in building like research robotics and building like practical robotics, there's an overlap between those two fields, but there are also very important differences. Like if you're writing your PhD, it doesn't matter whether you charge your batteries and whether you develop like an automatic system to reduce the human error in charging batteries. It doesn't really matter if you're doing your PhD. But if you're building a practical robotics system, it's actually these things that somebody forgot to charge batteries that actually kill you. And that's of course like a very blatant example. Maybe it's not that bad. I think most failures of Starship robots are actually not due to somebody forgetting to charge batteries. We have actually really good operations people who actually don't forget these things too much. But the overall theme still stays the same. It's the simple things that you need to take care of. And that's actually something where like deep specialist knowledge in robotics can actually kind of hurt you, because you might think, if you have deep specialist knowledge in academic robotics, for example, you might think, that's all there is in robotics, that you don't really need to charge batteries. You can always do like another test for your PhD and so forth. But in practical robotics, it's actually the simple things that become a little bit more important. Of course, we do have in Starship, we do have tons of people who can implement SLAM algorithms properly, and the parasitic capacitance is also something that our engineers are well aware of, but they're also well aware of the need to charge batteries and develop automatic systems to remind people to charge batteries and so forth. So another disadvantage is capital. This is actually a hard question. There is actually not a very good answer. Like when I said that there are less skilled people in each particular field in Estonia, for example, there's kind of a remedy for that. You can just train generalists into specialists, for example. With capital, actually, it's not so easy. There's not so easy answer. It's actually quite hard. And the reason being that most robotics companies actually need about 20 million euros or more to get to the point where they can first try their product in real life, like do like a beta test. They can do like lab tests. They can test the components, but it isn't like the product is not like anywhere near ready. And when we founded Starship, I also went to talk to some of the founders and executives at like iRobot and Rethink Robotics and a couple of these companies, and they actually all said, I asked them how much capital they needed and how much time they needed to get to the beta test stage, where they could actually use their robots, kind of the first time in their intended environment. And remarkably, they all said, something like 20 million, 30 million, something like that, and a couple of years. And that actually has held true also for Starship. I think Starship had also raised something like 16 or 20 million before Starship did our first like real-world deliveries. So in robotics, it's kind of a universal law. The thing is, in order to raise 20 million in capital, a VC fund, if you're raising that money from VCs, then VCs the typical sort of ticket size is about like 1/20th of the size of their fund. So if you want to raise 20 million from somebody, this somebody needs to have like 500 million, total fund size. Of course, it could be a combination of several VCs doing that, but then, they need to have like a combined total fund size of about 500 million or more. In US, I think there are probably, off the top of my head, I think there are at least 50 funds that have fund sizes more than 500 million. In Europe, it's probably about 5 or so. In Estonia, of course, it's 0. So this is a hard question, and it's something that is actually quite hard to overcome. And it's a fundamental limitation of building robotics companies in Europe. But what Starship has done is that we have raised capital from a combination of different sources, and some of them have been smaller European VCs that each have contributed then a much smaller amount, not 20 million, but much less than that. Then also larger US VCs who can do like 5 million, 10 million, and so forth. And then also European large companies. Daimler is one of our investors, for example. And they are the type of these European large companies that can actually invest in startups and have done that increasingly so lately. So there's some answer to that, but I would think that's still the largest disadvantage actually in building startups in Europe, particularly robotic startups. So one other thing that you need to have or you want to have when you're building robotic startups is that have an idea with a large market. There's actually no disadvantage here. Anyone can have a big idea. In reality, of course, there are some cultural differences. Like typically, if you are from a smaller place, you kind of tend to have smaller ideas. but there's no inherent disadvantage in here. Like literally anyone can have a big idea, can have a good idea to build a business on, and can work their way up. So the only recommendation is think big. Like you think you have an attractive startup idea. Just think how big the market is, and if you think the market is like 100 million per year or something like that, the total addressable market, then just multiply this by 10 and look for an idea that has 10 times bigger market or 100 times bigger market. So that's why also I said in the beginning that Starship has a bigger market than the Skype had, because if we power all deliveries in the world, we would be not $1 billion company, but a $1 trillion company. The other thing that overcomes a lot of limitations is the attitude of the team. And you can have good attitude anywhere you are. So there's no disadvantage there. If you look at what are the reasons where investors are deciding, for example, whether to invest in a company, then the team is one of the biggest drivers of investment decisions, and for a good reason. So there's no disadvantage there. You can have a great attitude, and what does the great attitude mean? It means that you find your way out of any problem. You engineer your way out of any problem. You outsmart everybody. You have this ingenuity and resourcefulness, and you pursue an idea if you know that long term it will work. Of course, there are setbacks, but you just go through these setbacks if you know that in long term that works. So this is a slide that has this thank you written there. So typically, that's a slide where the presenters typically shut up. I would normally also do that, but actually not this time. And the reason that I don't shut up right now is this web address here, medium.com Starship Technologies. It's a new address. We just launched our technology blog a couple of days ago. Me and one of our engineers, we wrote the initial two articles. So we're going to share with the world of what we have developed in robotics technology over the last 4 years. So if you want to see what's going around inside Starship, then read this, share this, tweet this. It's going to be awesome. So now is actually the time that I do shut up. And typically in my talks, I have seen that people have lots of questions, tons of questions. I think that I've told everything there is to tell about building Starship and building startups in small places. But I know you have much more questions that I can ever answer. So am I right in that assumption or not?
Should we do a few question and answers? Should we do a little question and answer right now?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
That's where you're going with this. Excellent. I got you, brother. Nice. Do we have, now we have our people walking around with microphones. Do put your hand up. We have a gentleman down here. I got a gentleman down here with his hand up. Excellent. I have a question for you, talking about the team in the last slide. And we're here in Tallinn. This is Robotex. We've got all these amazing skills and knowledge. It's a great place to be Tallinn, to really embrace this. But how do you balance off that, on one side, this is a great town to be in, to really live that atmosphere and grow that company. On the other hand, shortages of people are very, very difficult to hire in this town. How have you balanced that?
Well, I think Robotex really, shows that robotics is cool for the general population. There's lots of visitors, there's lots of robots being built, and so forth. But still, I would say most people who come to visit Robotex or even build robots at Robotex are not really robotics professionals. They are like students, or they are kids, or they are just passers-by who are interested in robots. But in contrast to the 15, 20, 25, 30,000 people who visit Robotex each year, the number of people who are actually experienced in building commercial robots and robotics companies is actually very small. Okay. So the success of Robotex shows that what will happen to the talent pool here in 10 years or 20 years.
Oh, so you're thinking long term about this a little bit here. You're thinking
absolutely. I think really the Robotex, the function of Robotex in the society is, I think, to educate people around robotics and the opportunities there, and the fruits of that education will come in 10 years. Of course, some of these fruits also come right now, but it's still only a handful of people.
Well, I guess that's it. If you're dealing with such a company and you're making these things, you have to think long term. This is not short term, and that was really the whole point of your presentation. We're going to go down here. We had a question from this gentleman.
So first of all, thank you for an amazing story of a successful and amazing startup. And also thank you for talking about more difficult questions as well. So my question is related to the venture capital, actually. So you mentioned you've used different sources of capital to actually acquire enough. Is there any order you would recommend to approaching venture capitalists and other sources of capital that works better in your opinion, or would you recommend just approaching everyone you can? Thank you.
Yeah, I think pretty much everyone you can is sort of the right strategy. Raising capital is one of these things, like dating, for example. Like, is there a good order, in which you should kind of approach, your potential, partners, for example? Like maybe there is, but it's more like black art than science, I think. Sometimes people click. Sometimes there is an investment decision, or sometimes people decide to work together, and sometimes not. And I think Starship has been lucky to find good investors, and this is a hard thing. And in general, it's the number of contacts you have, the number of presentations you do, the number of pitches you do, of course, the way you pitch your company. Like, you have to pitch your company in the way that people understand that this could be big.
Without sounding too direct, what you've just said makes sense. That it's about, a little bit maybe about the networking, the soft skills, your personality, if we're using that dating example there. What is the X factor? Why do you like someone you don't like someone? There's an X factor. But to be direct, has that been more difficult for you growing an Estonian company full of Estonian people who naturally, it's hard to do that small talk. It's hard to do the blah, blah, blah and the, smooging and all that kind of stuff.
You can learn that. Estonians are worse than other people for that, in that skill, but I don't think it really matters. And the other thing also is that investors are not looking for small talk, really. Okay. The small talk is not what matters. What mostly matters in the way of how you talk is that be on the point and cover the important aspects first. So that's why there is like a 90-second pitch, right? That in the first 90 seconds, you should cover the most important aspects of your company, why you think this will be a success. In the next, 3 minutes, you should cover the next, important things, and then, towards the end of the meeting, you talk kind of more of a details. But actually, too often, I have seen that startups pitch almost like the reverse way. Their startup is so obvious to them that they forget to mention the most important and the most impactful statements about their startup at all.
Okay, very good. We had another question from the gentleman here.
Hi everyone, I'm Simon from Precision Navigation Systems. Thank you for your talk. I have 2 quick questions, if you don't mind. So at which point of time you decided to, open a company or a branch in the United States? And because you basically have to do that in order to raise there, I think so. And the second one, was there any any situation or at some point of time when you thought, okay, like we have a big problems. This thing cannot work. Thanks.
So so United States, of course, and if you found something or start to hire and start to build a company in Estonia, then you have to break out of Estonia. At some reason, like you can't build $1 billion company, I think, in Estonia at all, really. So you have to break out, and we always knew that we have to start operations and offices in other countries as well. So of course, Silicon Valley is great for business contacts and raising capital and so forth. So it was an obvious choice. But also UK and Germany, for example, and we recently hired a CEO from Silicon Valley as well. So we are at this stage where we are harnessing these skills that we get from different places. Not just Estonia and not just Europe.
And the question was, have you been at a stage where you went, oh shit, I don't know how we're ever going to make it out of this technological/business issue or something like that? Like it just seemed like that was it. Has there been some moment?
It has been hard for me as a founder. Definitely, it has been hard. But I've never had a time in the history of Starship where I have stopped believing into our idea and vision. So I've always thought and always or never lost the vision, what we are going to build and why this will work. There definitely have been hard times where I have just thought that okay, it's just personally for me it's just so hard. Like there are so many problems, or there's so many things happening, that things going the wrong way and so forth. But these are more like tactical things. These are more like that do you get enough sleep at night and so forth. So it hasn't caused me to rethink whether the company has any value or not.
I love that. That's the founder's attitude. You don't give up. You know what you want to do, and you know that you can make it happen. We're going to have one final question from the gentleman down here at the front.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for the talk. Do you think there's anything specific about Tallinn or Estonia that allows the creation of skills that are missing, like the point you made about time-of-flight cameras, where we didn't have the skill before, but now kind of leading the world?
It's actually hard to say, what's so special about Estonia. Maybe historians will write about that in 30 years or so, or maybe 100 years. But I think the only thing that I've also been wondering, that Estonia has more startups in per capita and more startup investment per capita than pretty much any country in the world, or it's very very close to the top there. And I don't actually know why. There's like in first principles, like I said in my slide, like I think the average IQ is the same all around the world. Like I don't know what's the secret ingredient. Maybe the only thing that I can actually put my finger on is that Estonia regained independence from this evil empire some time ago, and that meant that I think it's still the case that in Estonia there is this belief that the world is not completed yet. The world is not ready yet. I would think, or I think I've seen that people who have grown up in countries which have been sort of more established, or there hasn't been like a big drastic change in the society quite long time ago, or quite recently, then some people, like young people, grow up and think the world is ready. I have this, if I want to think, what I'm going to do with my life, with my professional life, I just go and select from like a list of job offers from big companies. I join this, whether I join, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or whether I join, Daimler, or whether I, join, whatever, other big company. But in Estonia, there hasn't been actually these established big companies too much, and young people grow up and they don't have like an obvious career path that you should join PricewaterhouseCoopers, And that's why I think people are more open to various like left field opportunities, things that, maybe might work, but, probably do not. But they still try, and there's more of that attitude that, let's try, we have to be creative about our professional life, essentially.
Actually, I heard an Irish gentleman told me a theory yesterday, among the many things about that's very valid reasons. Why is the small population size, ability to believe that we can do anything. The theory was put to me that the Soviets put a computer science program into Tartu University. So as soon as independence came, boom, these guys were all over it. They were already ahead of the game. And then one of the factors has already been Estonia could have stayed ahead of the game.
Maybe it would be easy for me to say yes, that might be the reason, but just rationally speaking, I think like in 1970s or so forth, there were still lots of other places in the world where there were computers and people, handful of people, very small number of people, knew how to deal with computers, for example. So I don't think actually Estonia was special in that regard.
Well, something special. We'll work it out. Anyway, we need to move on. Thank you very much for your talking, your questions. One more round of applause for Ahti. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.